So we talked a bit about what components will come into the tax and what materials will come in, but ultimately who is it going to impact? Well, really, overall it will impact the entire waste management and supply chain, but we can split that out into direct impacts and indirect impacts. So a direct impact would be a business who is likely to pay the tax. So that's someone who will actually have to register with HMRC, declare how much packaging they've handled that is plastic, make reports on that each quarter, and then ultimately pay that £200 return fee. And then you've got the indirect businesses, and that's really anyone handling plastic packaging that may or may not fall under the tax. So if it does fall under the tax, it's likely that you will see an increase in cost around about £200 per tonne. It's possible it'll be higher than £200 because you'll also have the administrative burden that the direct taxpayer will see as well. But ultimately, the whole waste management chain will be impacted, but some will be impacted more than others. So when we look at the impact, it's important to talk about the actual flow of material and where the liability sits. So this is a retouched version of a diagram which was originally shared by HMRC when they tried to explain the tax for the first time in 2019. And what the kind of important notes to take away here is that there's two major tax points. So there's the point at which packaging is manufactured. So if it's UK sourced packaging, it's after the conversion process. So that last substantial modification by a converter, when that has taken place, the tax point occurs. And then for packaging which is coming from outside of the UK, the tax point is the import. But that could happen at various points. So for imported empty packaging, the pack filler or wholesaler who's importing that empty packaging would pay the tax because the tax point is at the point that they're taking ownership of it in the UK. And then for imported finished packaging, it would be most likely more the retailer or wholesaler that picks that up. But there will be varying points of liability throughout this supply chain. So looking at the actual impact of the tax, I just wanted to touch on how this might look in practice. So if we take two different businesses here, and this is a very simple example, but ultimately we've got business A, so they are manufacturing 200 tons of plastic packaging in the UK, and it's 100% virgin material. They're going to have to pay the tax on every single one of those 200 tons. So 200 tons by £200 per tonne works out at roughly £40,000 tax liability for them throughout that period. Business B, on the other hand, are importing material and they're importing 200 tons, but 100 tons of it is from a supplier who's able to demonstrate to them that 30% recycled content has been met, which means that the tax is still payable at that £200 rate, but only on 100 tons, which effectively halves their tax liability compared to business A. So what we expect to see in a situation like this is that the commercial value to business B of having that evidence effectively is worth around £20,000. So business A might look to try and get accreditation, or try and get some certification of their recycled content and move away from virgin material. But also business B, if they were importing from two different suppliers and one was able to demonstrate 30% recycled content and one was not, the commercial value of the ability to demonstrate recycled content comes at around £20,000 for that 100 tons of material that's supplied. There are also a range of non-tax costs to businesses though, and I think that the kind of key word here, or keywords, would be administratively burdensome. So we do think that this tax is likely to cause a lot of administrative challenges for businesses. So in terms of challenges, we've got one-off costs. So getting to understand the tax, training staff on how to realise what material is likely to fall under it, actually registering with HMRC, setting up a reporting process and framework. I mean, this is going to be something that you have to report on every single quarter. So it's effectively an additional quarterly tax return, whilst HMRC expect it to be done potentially alongside generic quarterly returns. That might not align with everyone's financial year. So you've got a lot to do there in terms of making sure that that setup cost is covered. And then you've got ongoing costs. So filing the reports themselves, paying the returns, keeping records. Ultimately, if you export packaging outside of the United Kingdom, there is an opportunity to get a credit for that if you've already paid the tax on it. But in order to get that credit, you have to keep records. So you have to have evidence that it's been exported. So there's more ongoing costs there just to minimize the cost of the tax as you export material. And ultimately, there is a due diligence issue here as well. So this tax is fundamentally supported by what's referred to as joint and several liability, where every party in the supply chain is responsible for ensuring that the tax has been paid on goods that they handle. So there is a bit of a due diligence issue here for businesses that are involved in the supply chain, ensuring the tax has been picked up. And then also there's a bit of a cost benefit analysis to be made at the point of where you can or can't achieve 30% recycled content. So I've had multiple different values quoted to me by multiple different companies, but it does appear that in some cases the cost of moving from 100% virgin to 30% recycled content on some packaging components could be upwards of 4 times the value of the tax, whilst in other cases it is affordable within that £200 per tonne. What we expect is that where businesses are going to have to pay more money to meet 30% than they will to pay the £200 per tonne, they would just pay the tax. So there is a cost benefit analysis to be done there as well. In terms of support, though, HMRC have been working on developing guidance. Originally, they did frame it as being clear technical guidance. Now, we're still not quite there yet from HMRC, and we're hoping for more to come from them in the early year. But just given how we've got less than 4 months until this tax comes into play now, it is very much the last kind of the last period of support from them, and we do really need them to push forward with that. And then also the industry really, and industry-wide support is going to be really important here. So that increased demand for recycled content could, in theory, lead to an increase in value of recyclate, and therefore that would make that £200 per tonne more achievable. But at the moment, until the tax actually begins being paid, it's not yet clear to see how that innovation and how that additional funding will be generated. So we have not yet covered recycled plastic in terms of what we mean by recycled content. So I've talked a lot about where that 30% recycled content can or can't be used, what the cost differential is. But what I haven't yet mentioned is how do we actually define recycled content? So this is taken effectively verbatim from the regulations, but recycled plastic is a term in there which is used to denote something which is reprocessed from, and these are the keywords here, so recovered material by means of either a chemical or a manufacturing recycling process. So then what is recovered material? Well, recovered material is something that's either pre-consumer or post-consumer plastic packaging material that has either been collected and recovered as material input. So instead of new material, it's been used effectively using waste instead of virgin, and it also needs to otherwise be in a position where it otherwise would have been disposed of or as waste or sent for energy recovery. So it's effectively something where if we were not using this as part of a recycling process, it would end up going for either energy recovery or landfill. And that is split into two different types: pre-consumer and post-consumer. So pre-consumer material is something that is recovered from waste generated as part of a manufacturing process. So that's not actually a finished product that has made it to market. This might be scrap and scrapings and wastage from a plastics manufacturing process, and then that material needs to have been taken and reprocessed at a reprocessing facility, and also made back into pellet or back into flake prior to being used again. So the reason this is quite important is that a lot of businesses have, where they're extruding plastics, they will have a system where they take offcuts, they take extrusion blowout, and they take scrap material, and in layman's terms they throw it into the top of the hopper. So you effectively are taking it, putting it back in the top of the machine, and continuing what is referred to as an open loop manufacturing process. Now, what becomes unclear when we look at the plastic tax is whether or not that material would count towards your 30% recycled content or not. And the general consensus is no. However, if you took it and rather than having it closed loop back into the same machine, you repelletized it or reflaked it at a reprocessing facility and then used it as part of your manufacturing process, it would count towards that 30% recycled content. And then, so that covers pre-consumer material. And then on the other hand, we've got post-consumer. So that is something that is ultimately been made into a packaging product, which has then gone through the supply chain and been used, and then has become waste generated by either a household, commercial, industrial, or institutional facility, and then is collected and used for a different purpose, in this case recycled back into a product. So post-consumer material is much more easy to identify than pre-consumer in terms of its viability. So all post-consumer material will count towards the 30% recycled content. And if you are handling a lot of pre-consumer material, it's really important that you try and get your head around that definition of a reprocessing facility and repelletizing and reflaking, rather than just taking stuff from the scrapings from the machine and putting them back into the start of the process. Now, we do expect that these definitions aren't set in stone, so they will, as more comes to light around the practical implications of this tax, they will likely change, but this is the latest that we know on this situation at the moment.